This talk is supposed to be about creative values, and I didn't really ever think about my own creative values until, well, till right before, well, Shantanu was talking. He said a few things, so I wrote mine down. One of them, I've said several times, but I didn't realize it was one of my values. It says, I was saying, if you want to be an artist, don't be a realist. Don't be realistic, because the chances that you'll be successful aren't real. The second is the role of the artist I've learned through this artist, Richard Long, is to work in a society's subconscious. You know, our job is to make sense out of things, or actually to make sense out of things that don't make sense, or to not make sense out of things that we think make sense. In a society that's everything is functional, actually becomes dead, you know, and so maybe it's somebody's job to actually think about just the color blue for the sake of it, because that's what our humanity is about. And then I realized my job is to really basically to make my dreams come true every day. And you know, sometimes I have trouble distinguishing my dreams from my nightmares, but that's the nature of working as an artist. And then I really see myself as feeling the need to think creatively about things that I already know. And so I really think about, I've always really been interested in framing context, as I mentioned, and when I think about the frame of a photograph, I was always fascinated with how whoever's holding the frame affects what we see. You know, basically every photograph we know is manipulated because it's a narrow, it's a split second of time, a narrow point of focus, and it can never actually tell the truth. And usually there's more things happening outside of the frame of a camera than actually within it. And so I've always been interested in kind of how my own subjectivity limits my ability to actually see what's really happening. And thinking about how that relates to my own identity as an African American, as an artist, I was reading a book called Everything But the Burden, and there was a quote by Carl Hancock Rux in it, and he says, there's something called black in America, there's something called white in America, and I know them when I see them, but I will forever be unable to explain the meaning of them because they're not real, even though they have a very real place in my daily way of seeing, a fundamental relationship to my ever-evolving understanding of history, and a critical place in my relationship to humanity. I sometimes say, if I could ever plagiarize an artist statement, this would be it. And I basically just did. How many people know who this is? Or what do you think this guy did? At some point in the 20th century, this was the most celebrated African-American person in the country. Actually, he was the first African-American to get a leading role on Broadway. This is how he performed his blackness. And I was really fascinated with, this is Burt Williams, I was really fascinated with how he chose to describe and to show himself when he was behind stage, and the way that America celebrated him. And this, I really started to really think about what is authenticity when we think about race, identity. And I started to think about what I sometimes say history doesn't laugh. In that, like, we think about history, there's these grand narratives we've been told about this people and this happened, but really, in reality, there's several histories happening all at once. And what we choose to remember is actually almost as important, not as important, as what we choose to forget. And I saw this actually image that I framed at one point in a postcard. It was just a postcard in an old museum. And it was a picture of an African-American man wearing a World War I soldier's hat, his Sunday best, and holding a rifle, which was surprising to me because it's not the kind of image I've seen of African-Americans in that period of time. And on the back, all that was written was this: "Remember me." And I thought this is like a message to the future. You know, the fact that like whoever took this photograph realized how important you know, actually this image could be to the future. And so I started really thinking about kind of what other kind of things have changed. So does anybody know who these guys are? So this was like the status quo throughout most of my life. You know, there was like, you know, a black man who was like the king of the ring, and there was like a white guy who was king of everything else. And then what's miraculously happened is this amazing flipping of the script, which is so, you know, one thing we think about all the time, but there's other thing that happened that really complicates our whole notion of like who has the power and who has the role to do what. And how many of us have paid attention to heavyweight boxing in the past 10 years? Really, that's what I find so fascinating. And then also, how I think of our Barack Obama's campaign as basically the second most successful advertising campaign of all time. The fact that he could actually take a word like hope and make it his is pretty fascinating. And thinking about of advertising campaigns, I've really always been interested in how the seductiveness of advertising, because it basically advertising is a reflection of our hopes and dreams, and there's so much embedded in it that is kind of overlooked. So that was an image that we know was Michael Jordan. And there was an essay by Stanley Crouch, and he said, in 1960, if white girls in the suburbs had posters of a Negro that dark on the wall, there would have been hell to pay. That kind of racial paranoia is not true in the country now. Today, you have girls who are Michael Jordan fanatics, and their parents don't care. And I found that fascinating, thinking about that this person was born in the segregated South, the descendants of slaves, for some reason was able to transcend race, gender, and international boundaries through his ability to put a ball through a hoop. But I was wondering how someone of his nature would have been treated at a different period of time. And so I really started to think about how I could use this language of advertising to talk about things that advertising isn't supposed to talk about. I think about logos as our generation's hieroglyphs, in a sense, and thinking about the way that messages are embedded in them and all the different things that we could actually do to create our own new meaning through combining these logos to talk about things that aren't meant to be commodified. And so, for instance, people. I thought about this amazing Absolute campaign that I always loved, and thought about the construction of a quote-unquote black identity. I thought, we're thinking of Africa being this diverse continent with hundreds of millions of people and speaking thousands of languages and thousands of cultures. And the idea of, if someone chose to kidnap these people, package them into ships, send them halfway across the world and tell them they're all the same, to me, like, that's absolute power. The fact that, this whole notion of race, and I think about race as the most actually successful advertising campaign, because to me, I always say the craziest thing about blackness is that black people didn't create it, that Europeans with a commercial interest in dehumanizing us created black people. Does anybody notice my skin is brown? But I started thinking about how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, and how today so many of us, including me, brand ourselves, and kind of what does that say about our relationship to our own individual identity compared to a collective notion of identity that's somewhat arbitrarily constructed, and thinking about how sometimes history repeats itself through the things that we celebrate. And also, where do African Americans come from? This is a piece I created called A Place to Call Home. So all of my work, in a sense, is really about framing context. It's also an investigation of the hybridity that exists within me. And I'm constantly fascinated with how each of us is actually diverse within ourselves, and how so many of us are actually reduced to any number of narrow perspectives. And so and sometimes those ways in which we are viewed have consequences. But I was really trying to deal with this notion of black male identity and how it related to myself, because so much of the things that have been said or talked about related to black men in America always didn't sit right with me. And I realized how could I actually kind of get a consensus about what black men do. And so I had a professor named Chris Johnson, and he created this project along with me called Question Bridge Black Males, which is just take a look.
Black man.
Do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
What is the reluctance for taking responsibility for improving our communities?
Are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with your son being gay?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that take mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent?
Why?
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 Why? Why?
Why?
What I want to know is why.
I believe that we've incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough.
I can't let him see no type of sucker.
Along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why didn't y'all leave us the blueprint.
We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was.
That's something that we dropped the ball on.
What do you fear?
That something will harm my children.
I fear success.
Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
Hold on, bro. Y'all niggas crazy.
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black people can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
So basically, Chris, myself, Bayate Ross Smith, and Kamal Sinclair really went on this journey to ask African American men to ask and answer each other's questions, because we realized that there's actually more diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And the process was pretty simple. We would just go to African American men.
My question to the black man in America or anywhere else is, what is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
We'd ask them to ask a question like that, and then we'd take that question to someone else and show it to them, and then they would respond.
Our commonality is in our history, but I think our beauty as black people is also in our diversity.
And first we thought we'd be doing a documentary project where we'd take the best questions and the best answers. And what we actually wound up having is very different questions. We had over 150 different questions with over 160 participants, and then we had different answers to every question. And we went around the country and we collected these questions and answers, and I was surprised that even myself didn't really understand what black men cared about, what were African American men's values. So we actually created what's now a transmedia project, which is a video art installation that's a 3-hour, 5-channel video installation that's exhibited in over 30 museums and galleries across the country. And I really have been interested in this idea of making art by committee, and that, like, rather than it just being me saying what I think, the idea of actually sharing and learning through this process. And so we just launched our website, which is called questionbridge.com, where basically self-identified African American men can actually log on and ask and answer each other's questions, and those who don't identify as African American men can actually function almost as like flies on the wall in this conversation that really isn't about kind of race or gender or identity. It's really about people and what happens when people are put into groups, how they relate to the notion of the group itself, and how they relate to each other. And basically what's so fascinating is that you can tag yourself in any number of ways, and you can search this kind of archive of questions and answers and conversation that really, I hope, will show that this really beauty of diversity that exists within each of us. And so all of the projects I've been really focusing on of late are the kind of this really fascinating experience of kind of elevating the voices of everyday people and getting them invested in actually telling their stories and learning from them. So often we look at it as artists and art as being a process where we put out something for the world to consume, and I'm really interested in actually creating platforms for the world to offer wisdom that I can learn from. So another collaborative project I've done more recently is called The Truth Booth, and my collaborators and I actually thought it'd be fascinating to make kind of like a modern day confession booth. So you walk into the Truth Booth, and there's a touchscreen that says, everyone has their version of the truth. What's yours? Speak for the next 2 minutes, starting with the truth is. And what's so fascinating is there's one thing that no one can kind of refute about us, is what we believed is true. And all of our truths are valid. And this kind of this is us in Ireland. It's kind of it was a pretty fascinating journey with some really creative ways of complementing the project. And what was really fascinating actually starting the project in Ireland is some of the things that people offered. This is one example.
The truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small. It's very hard to see, but if you look really, really close, you will find the truth, and it's all around. Thank you.
It is true that I have got a girlfriend that is named Rian. And it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Faces and, well, I've joined the agency of there, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Accident Keen production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets, and my parents. Peace out.
The truth, I believe, is Lego. Lego makes you think small, but believe big. Lego is in all our minds. So the truth is very, very small, but think big. This is very cute.
12-year-old just rocked my mind. And who can actually refute that? So we are actually able to take the Truth Booth to a number of places, even though we're still just beginning the project, and have had actually nearly 3,000 people participate. This is at a presidential debate where we know this is actually kind of the source of the truth forums in America. And we've taken it recently to Cleveland Museum, but last summer Ryan and Jim took it to Afghanistan, who were my collaborators, Ryan Alexiev and Jim Ricks. And there were so many amazing things that came out of that. And here's just a few.
از تحصیل خود فایده‌های بیشتر دیدین. پس شما هم باید تحصیلاتتان ادامه دهید.
حقیقت خود در افغانستان میبخشین که هیچ نیست. کلش چال است، نیرنگ است، فریب است و خود به قدرت رساندن است. دیگر کدام چیزی وجود نداره. ما در مدت 30 سال شد که پشت حقیقت میگردیم، اما حقیقت پیدا کرده نتونستیم که حقیقت در کجاست، واقعیت در کجاست، اما موفق شده نتونستیم و ندیده تونستیم.
حقیقت این است، از به ظاهر آزاد بودن خسته ایم. حرف عمل میخواهیم.
And there's so many more of these that were collected, and so fascinating just to see how, given the opportunity to actually share our wisdom, we all actually are not only beautiful, but actually, for instance, with this project and also with Question Bridge, one of the things I neglected to say is, especially with Question Bridge, what I love about it is I feel like it's the first art/social science project where both the researchers and the experts are the participants of the project. So it's this closed circle where it's not an expert coming from outside saying, these are these people, these are these values. And really, I think what this 21st century kind of economy of generosity and crowdsourcing is about us actually all using our voices. And thinking about that, thinking about just this picture, which was taken by a photographer in Memphis, Tennessee, named Ernest Withers, 1968, during the Sanitation Workers March, which was just 8 years before I was born. And I found it fascinating that it was necessary in this country for people to stand in a group and collectively affirm their humanity. Because the term that I grew up with wasn't I am a man, it was I am the man. And I thought it was this fascinating thing that going from the civil rights movement, where it was this other kind of collective statement, it's all about the me and the many me's within us. And so I created a series of paintings kind of thinking of all of the different riffs I could kind of based off of that political poster. And I always love to read the last line as a poem, where it says, I'm the man, who's the man, you the man, what a man, I am human, I am many, I am I am amen. Because I ultimately realized that rather than trying to validate myself based off of anyone else's system of value, maybe my greatest gift is my consciousness. And so that's kind of my mantra, which I hope to share with you. And I hope I did it. Thank you.